Hi, today I'm going to talk about how to remove the little bit of the white line here around a cutout. Now, this cutout was made, and I'll turn off the layers here so you can see, pretty detailed, pretty good accuracy. Of course, all of this little blah 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 is just to add some black background. Now, what I suggest is that it's always a good idea to just keep your background, to keep your knockout on its own separate layer and not put anything else in there. So you can see this is the original picture. It was taken with a rather hard light, so you get this shadow detail there. And anytime you get the shadow detail here, it's a good idea to try to eliminate that a little bit. And even if it's just a matter of softening it out. So I'm going to talk about the detail of getting rid of this line here in a second, but if you're going to work to remove or eliminate this shadow, or not even eliminate, just kind of minimize the impact, what I'd suggest is adding a new layer. Use the healing brush tool. I like the healing brush rather than spot healing brush. Spot healing brush is going to sample what it considers to be relevant, pixel information around where you're editing. The healing brush tool lets you sample wherever you want to sample, so it can be much more accurate that way. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger here, and square brackets are the way to increase and decrease the brush size. Since we're doing this on a new layer, it's very important that you have this either set to current and below or all layers. If it's set at the default of current layer, then you're just going to be sampling empty pixels, and obviously nothing will actually happen. So here we have samples, and you can see just by kind of smoothing out with the healing brush that already it's a little bit less noticeable. Obviously this is a very rough sort of edit here, but you can see that just by smoothing out this line here, it becomes a little bit less obvious. Now, the more time you spend, obviously, the better this is going to look. You can, in addition to use the healing brush tool, I would use the stamper, and I would use this with a relatively low opacity and flow, and this way you'll get kind of a blended effect. And just like the spot healing brush, you need to sample and then kind of brush, and you can see how a combination of these tools really can go a long way towards minimizing those hard shadows that you get. And this can be a really nice way to take care of that kind of an edit. Whoops, went down a little too far. You can see I was starting to sample in his hat there. So, of course, you could just do an undo, but just as easy to do that sometimes too. So you can see on and off, it's not a perfect edit here. This took all of just a few moments here, but you get the idea. Definitely a viable option. Now, one of the things you can do is to, on your background layer, make the selection and let's see, the selection tool we want to use. Probably what we want to use is the magnetic lasso. And so if you've not used it, it just kind of follows along with the high contrast areas. And here you can see if you get kind of wacky, then it won't work very well. There's different things you can do. Let's just go back to where we are so we can undo this. You can change your settings here. Width, I'd probably keep that around where it is. Contrast, for this, with this, you got the white background, you can go pretty high contrast. So let's make this like 50% instead. And now you can see how that works, and it goes pretty good. And you can see how it follows along pretty well, and you kind of get the idea here. Once we make the initial select, then we can fine tune it if we need to. And then of course down. Now you can see I missed a corner here, so what I do is go back to the lasso tool, just the regular one, we're going to have the second box here selected, and you can see this is add to selection. So now we're just going to add to that. Here we're going to zoom in. We're going to add kind of right here, and you can continue to fine tune in as much as you need to. Here we have a little bit too much, and so then you're going to want to use the subtract from selection, except that it didn't click. And you can see how the lasso tool now it's got a little minus, now it's got a little plus, and then compared to just the regular. So here we're going to go and get rid of that. And we're going to kind of follow along. And you can see how this is going. In relatively no time, you can get a pretty decent knockout. Just follow this little part of the hat, and then we'll call this more or less done. Now the thing, let's do one more little plus. Oh, that's negative. Now the thing with the knockouts is when you were in real close, you could see how this has this little bit of a feathering effect. Now that's where you're going to come. That's where the difficulty is going to come in. And once you get to here, if you do Command or Control J, depending on if you're on a Mac or PC, that's going to copy your selection to a new layer. So let's zoom out. You can see what we got here. We're going to turn that off. And you can see with very little effort, it was a pretty decent knockout. Anyways, we've already got a good knockout, so we're just going to go ahead and turn these off, and we're going to work with that. Now, again, like I said, what I would usually do is just keep the knockout on its own separate layer and remove this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to erase this and clean it up. Use the eraser tool. Nice big. Make sure you're on the right layer. Nice big brush. And just go ahead and erase that. Keeping everything on their own separate layer will make your life much easier. The biggest thing, when you go back to refine, what you'll find is that if things are on the wrong layers, then you got to kind of hunt and search for where they actually belong, and there's actually a little bit of light. That's pretty good. So then here we have the background layer. We're going to go with black. Now you can see how this was set to fit the picture here exactly, and that's actually probably not the easiest way to go. So what I would say is, rather than use this, we're going to add a new layer. We're going to turn this on here for a second, and we're going to sample this color so it's just a little bit brighter than pure black. Turn this back off. We're going to add in just using the paint bucket tool, and you can see that just by doing that we got rid of almost all of the little white line that we could see with here. So the reason that this didn't work as the cutout is because of that little bit of blur that we could see in the original, and just by removing that, we kind of go straight to the we eliminate it. So we go from what's portrait to what's just black background. Now you can see it's not perfect here, and one thing that you might consider doing is blurring the edges a little bit, giving a little bit of feathered effect. So if we hold down the control key and click on here, it activates this layer. Now if we invert that, so control I or command I, oops, not that way, excuse me, control shift I will invert the selection, control I will invert the colors. We're going to add a layer mask, and you can see how we have just this little bit of an edge. And what I want to do here is feather this a little bit. Now the reason I invert it here is just so you can see that black on black easy. And we're going to do filter, we're going to do blur, Gaussian blur, and just kind of play with this a little bit. And you can see how little is probably better. And then we'll invert this again. Control Shift I. Now it's just Control I. So anyways, you see we're pretty close here. It's going to need some fine tuning on the edges, but that's the easiest way that I would do this kind of a knockout. And let me know if you have any questions.